16-year-old boy in the French countryside, bored out of his mind, too far from city lights and television, started writing a story to entertain himself. It was exactly what you'd expect from an imaginative teenager. A charismatic everyman with an absurd sci-fi name, a futuristic city, and a beautiful ancient being who falls from the sky. He put it in a drawer. He went off to become a filmmaker. He made Nikita. He made Léon, The Professional. And then, 22 years later, he pulled that notebook back out and made the most expensive European film in history. By 1997, The Fifth Element had become something nobody in Hollywood had seen coming. Not from a French director. Not on that scale. Not with that cast, those costumes, that specific brand of gleeful, neon-drenched chaos. It grossed $263 million worldwide and was simultaneously called both the best and the worst summer blockbuster ever made, often by the same critics in the same review. Today, 15 facts that go deep inside one of cinema's most unlikely masterpieces. From the cast that almost wasn't, to the language invented for a single character, to the opera performance that was physically impossible to sing, to the love story playing out behind the camera that nobody on set was supposed to know about. Stay until number one. That one is about what this film was always really trying to say. Let's count it down. 15. Luc Besson conceived the film at age 16.
To make your flight as short as possible, our flight attendants are switching on the sleep regulator.
The story of The Fifth Element begins not in a Hollywood boardroom or a studio development meeting, but in a teenager's bedroom in rural France. Luc Besson grew up with parents who were scuba diving instructors. His childhood was spent far from urban life, in a world of water and nature rather than cinema and culture. Without constant access to television or film, he created his own entertainment. He read voraciously, particularly French science fiction comics, especially the Valérian and Laureline series by Jean-Claude Mézières, which depicted a futuristic universe of alien civilizations and human adventurers across an impossibly detailed visual landscape. At 16, he began writing a novel. It was the story of an ancient being sent to save the world, a mythology built around the four classical elements: earth, air, fire, water, plus a mysterious fifth that represented life itself. It was grandiose, emotional, thoroughly adolescent, and deeply serious in the way only teenage creative work can be. He put it away. He became a filmmaker. He made Subway, The Big Blue, Nikita, and then Léon, The Professional, each one building his reputation and his access to larger budgets. And throughout all of it, the idea in the notebook never quite went away. When he finally began developing it seriously in the early 1990s, he was approaching 40. He was 38 years old when the film opened in theaters. 22 years from first concept to cinema screen. Most filmmakers abandon the projects they begin as teenagers. Besson turned his into the most expensive European film ever made. 14. The film was originally cast with Mel Gibson, Julia Roberts, and Prince. By the time Besson was ready to shoot, the film had already been cast once and then stopped. In the early 1990s, as financing was being assembled, Besson had identified his dream cast: Mel Gibson, fresh off Braveheart and at the peak of his commercial power, as Corbin Dallas, Julia Roberts as Lilu, Prince as Ruby Road. Jean-Paul Gaultier was already attached to design the costumes and had even produced detailed sketches of what Prince's outfits would look like. Then the financing collapsed. The production went on hold. The dream cast dissolved. 2 years later, when the film resumed, everything had changed. Gibson had moved on and was no longer available. Roberts was not part of the reconfigured project. Mila Jovovich was cast as Lilu. For Corbin Dallas, Besson's producer Patrice Ledoux has said that Sylvester Stallone actually pursued the role independently. He'd heard about the production and wanted in. Besson was reportedly not interested. Stallone, Ledoux recalls Besson saying, simply wasn't right for the film. The role eventually went to Bruce Willis, in a way that has been told differently across multiple accounts. The most persistent version is that Willis's then-wife Demi Moore first told him about Besson's project. Willis and Besson met. Willis reportedly liked the script and told Besson that if that were the case, they'd figure out the money, which they did. He was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, thanks to Pulp Fiction and 12 Monkeys. Making the budget work to include him required creative financing. The film that became a cultural touchstone was originally something entirely different, and the cast it eventually assembled, Jovovich, Willis, Chris Tucker, Gary Oldman, produced something that the original lineup, however impressive on paper, probably wouldn't have. 13. The comic book artists who built the future. Most films hire a production design team to create the visual world. The Fifth Element hired the people who had invented the visual language of the genre itself. Besson grew up reading Jean-Claude Mézières and Jean Moebius Giraud, the two most celebrated French science fiction comic book artists of their generation. Mézières had co-created Valérian and Laureline, a series set in a vast, multicultural galactic civilization that was visually unlike anything American science fiction had attempted. Moebius, Giraud's pen name, was equally legendary, his clean, detailed line work defining the aesthetic of European science fiction for 2 decades. He had worked on Ridley Scott's Alien in concept art stages and on Jodorowsky's never-completed Dune adaptation. Besson hired both of them to work on The Fifth Element's production design, the futuristic New York at the heart of the film, the flying taxis, the stacked vertical city with delivery services dropping off meals directly through apartment windows, the specific density and color of a civilization compressed upward rather than outward, drew directly from the visual vocabulary they had spent decades developing in print. The connection was openly acknowledged. Corbin Dallas's flying taxi was directly inspired by a vehicle in Mézières's comic The Circles of Power, in which a character drives through the congested aerial traffic of a futuristic city in almost exactly the same situation. Besson had essentially hired the people whose imagination had fed his own for 20 years to help him finally build what he'd been picturing since he was a teenager. The film's visual identity wasn't borrowed from science fiction tradition. It came from the specific people who had created that tradition in Europe. The language Lilu speaks was invented by 2 people writing letters to each other. When Luc Besson needed a language for Lilu, the Fifth Element, ancient and alien, reconstructed from a single hand and dropped into a 23rd century she didn't recognize, he needed something that felt genuinely foreign, not the garbled phonetic noise of most fictional alien tongues, something with internal consistency, something that could be learned. He and Mila Jovovich invented it together. They called it divine language, and they built it with a vocabulary of approximately 400 words. The method they used to develop and internalize it was practical and personal. They wrote letters to each other in it, back and forth. Real correspondence, conducted in a language that existed nowhere else. 2 people exchanging thoughts and feelings in a constructed vocabulary, giving it the weight of actual communication rather than the hollow sound of performance. The result, on screen, is one of the most convincing fictional languages in cinema. When Lilu speaks it, panicked, furious, tender, exhausted, it sounds like something that means something, because for the 2 people who created it, it did. Jovovich later spoke about the experience of developing the language as genuinely intimate, a creative collaboration that gave the relationship between Lilu and Besson's vision of her a depth that couldn't have come from conventional preparation. Tolkien spent decades building the linguistic architecture of Middle-earth. Besson and Jovovich did it in the months before filming, in letters written in a language they invented for a character who needed it. 11. Ruby Road was written for Prince, who refused it for being too effeminate. End of transmission. This is the fact that makes you stop and genuinely try to imagine a different version of the film. Ruby Road, the flamboyant, high-pitched, physically volatile celebrity broadcaster played by Chris Tucker in one of the most physically committed comedic performances of the 1990s, was not originally Tucker's role. Luc Besson wrote it, with Prince specifically in mind. The logic was coherent. Ruby Road required someone who embodied a specific kind of otherworldly performance energy, someone who was already a character, whose presence carried its own mythology, who could walk into the frame and make the camera believe it. Prince with his particular brand of theatrical androgyny and absolute musical authority, was exactly that person. Jean-Paul Gaultier designed Ruby's costumes with Prince in the role, producing detailed sketches of outfits that went even further in their extravagance than what Tucker eventually wore. Everyone was enthusiastic. Then Prince withdrew. The reasons have been explained differently by different people. Besson said there were scheduling conflicts. Prince was frequently late to meetings, sometimes not showing up for weeks at a time. Gaultier offered a different account. Prince had looked at the role and told him it was too effeminate. There was also, reportedly, a linguistic misunderstanding in a meeting that left Prince's security detail suddenly reaching for their client, though the specifics of that incident have been described only in vague terms. What followed was Chris Tucker's casting, his only role between his 1995 breakthrough and Rush Hour in 1998. Tucker threw himself into the character with such complete physical commitment that it's genuinely difficult to imagine anyone else in the role. But somewhere in the alternate history of cinema, there exists a version of The Fifth Element where the most extravagant character in the frame is being played by the most extravagant performer of his era. If this kind of real story, the casting that almost was, the decisions that shaped the film behind the camera, is the kind of deep dive you're looking for, subscribe. We do this every week. 10. The Diva's opera was physically impossible to sing. The Diva Plava Laguna sequence is the single most technically ambitious scene in The Fifth Element. A blue-skinned alien opera singer performs a dramatic aria in a floating luxury resort, while a battle for the fate of the world plays out in the background. It is also, in the most literal sense, something that cannot exist. Composer Eric Serra wrote the music for the Diva's performance, a sequence that begins with a genuine aria from Gaetano Donizetti's opera Lucia di Lammermoor, and then transforms, mid-performance, into something that no trained human singer could produce. The score moves into registers and patterns that require a vocal range and a speed of execution that exceeds what the human voice is physically capable of. This was intentional. The sequence is performed by an alien. The alien can sing things humans cannot. The musical writing specifically goes beyond human capability to mark the diva as genuinely otherworldly in a way that no amount of costume or makeup could fully accomplish. The aria was actually sung by Albanian soprano Inva Mula. Her performance covers everything in the humanly possible range. The sections that exceed human capability were produced electronically, synthesized and layered over Mula's voice to create the full effect. The seamless blending of human performance and electronic impossibility is so complete that most viewers never register the transition. The role of the diva on screen was played by Maïwenn Lebesco, Besson's wife at the time of production. The singing, the music, the impossible biology of the character's voice, all of it assembled from 4 different sources, combined in post-production into a single 3-minute performance that remains one of the most discussed scenes in 1990s science fiction cinema. 9. Gary Oldman built his villain from a phone call and a spaghetti western. Gary Oldman's portrayal of Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, the weapons magnate and unwilling agent of global destruction in his white suit and translucent head shield, is one of the most deliberately theatrical villain performances of the decade. He is camp and menacing simultaneously. His accent is something between a southern drawl and a European caricature. His physical mannerisms are maximalist and oddly specific. Nothing about him is accidental. Oldman has explained where Zorg came from in interviews conducted over the years, and the answer is more deliberately constructed than it might appear. The accent, he has said, grew from a single phone call with a specific person. He has described it as the voice of an actual individual he knew with that particular cadence and affect, transposed directly onto the character. The physicality was shaped partly by the tradition of spaghetti western villain performances, the specific brand of theatrical menace that Sergio Leone's films had developed, where the villain was as interesting to watch as any hero and whose malevolence was presented with a kind of aesthetic pleasure. The result is a villain who could theoretically be cut out of the film entirely. Zorg and Lilu never share a single scene, and yet whose presence gives the film its visual counterweight. The plot doesn't require Zorg to function. The film does. Oldman understood this and built a performance that exists in its own register, serving the movie's tonal architecture rather than its narrative mechanics. It is, by almost any measure, more fun than the story requires, which is exactly what it needed to be. 8. A crew of 80 built New York at 1/24th scale over 5 months. The futuristic New York that fills the frame of The Fifth Element, the stacked towers, the congested aerial traffic lanes, the specific visual density of a city that has grown upward rather than outward, was not created by digital technology alone. A crew of 80 people spent 5 months building dozens of city blocks at a scale of 1/24. The models were detailed enough to function convincingly on film: windows, architectural details, the texture of surfaces. Flying cars were added digitally. Live-action footage of people on the streets was composited in. The final image on screen is a combination of miniature, digital, and real human elements layered together with enough precision that the seams are essentially invisible. The decision to use physical models at that scale, rather than relying entirely on digital effects, reflected both the practical limitations of 1996 CGI and an aesthetic preference for the weight and texture that physical objects bring to the frame. Pure digital cityscapes of the era had a particular visual quality, slightly floaty, slightly ungrounded, that physical miniatures didn't share. The hybrid approach gave the film's future a solidity that holds up significantly better than contemporaneous all-digital environments. It also required 5 months and 80 people building a city that nobody would ever see in full except through a camera lens. 7. The film was the most expensive European production ever made. At a budget of $90 million, The Fifth Element was, at the time of its release, the most expensive European film ever made. Not the most expensive French film, the most expensive European film. Period. The context matters. European cinema in the 1990s operated on budgets that were a fraction of American blockbuster spending. The infrastructure for large-scale production was largely concentrated in Hollywood. Making a film at this scale in Europe required Besson to build systems from scratch or import expertise from outside. Filming took place at Pinewood Studios in London. Besson had originally wanted to shoot in France, but suitable facilities couldn't be found. The desert scenes were filmed in Mauritania. The production assembled a genuinely international crew. The film grossed $263 million worldwide, nearly 3 times its budget, and remained the highest-grossing French film in history until The Untouchables surpassed it in 2011. But the real achievement wasn't the money, it was the proof. Besson had demonstrated that European cinema could compete at American blockbuster scale while remaining distinctly European. The visual DNA, the tonal anarchy, the specific relationship between fashion and world building, none of that was American. It was French, and it worked. 6. The diva Plavalaguna was played by Besson's wife, while he was falling for his lead actress. This is the entry that requires careful handling because it involves real people in real pain and real circumstances. But it is also documented, discussed publicly by the people involved, and essential to understanding the full emotional context of the film's production. The role of the diva Plavalaguna, the blue-skinned alien opera singer whose performance is the film's most spectacular set piece, was played by Maïwenn Lebesco. Maïwenn was Luc Besson's wife at the time of production. During the making of The Fifth Element, Besson fell for Milla Jovovich, his lead actress. By the time filming ended, his marriage to Maïwenn was over. Besson and Jovovich married at the end of 1997. They divorced in 1999 after Besson had directed Jovovich in the lead role of The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc. Maïwenn has spoken publicly about the experience in subsequent years, describing it with understandable complexity. She was married to the director. She was in the film. The man who cast her in the role was simultaneously beginning a relationship with another woman in the same production. The diva Plavalaguna, the character who appears briefly, spectacularly, and then is shot before she can reveal the location of the stones, is one of the most visually arresting figures in the film. She is played by Besson's wife. Her singing voice is Albanian soprano Inva Mula. The emotional circumstances of her on-screen performance are something no viewer looking only at the frame could know. There is something very particular about the fact that the film's most romantic figure, the character whose presence most purely embodies beauty and mystery, was shaped by a situation this complicated. 5. The production spent 9 years in development. The Fifth Element did not arrive quickly. Between Besson's decision to seriously develop the project and its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival in May 1997, 9 years passed. 9 years of script development, 9 years of casting and recasting, 9 years of searching for financing at a scale that European cinema had never previously attempted, 9 years of assembling a creative team that would include 2 legendary comic book artists, the most prominent fashion designer in France, a composer, a cinematographer, and eventually the specific actors who would make the whole thing work. Patrice Ledoux, the film's lead producer, has described the development process in detail. The false starts, the financing collapses, the project going on hold and being revived. The original cast was assembled and then dissolved when the money fell apart. The script went through multiple drafts, moving between Besson and co-writer Robert Mark Kamen as the story was shaped and reshaped. The Cannes premiere was, in every sense, the culmination of a decade of work. Besson brought the film to the world's most prestigious film festival, which happened to be celebrating its 50th anniversary that year, and celebrated with a party that reportedly cost $1 million. A Jean-Paul Gaultier fashion show, a futuristic ballet, guests including the biggest celebrity couple on the planet, invitations that came in the form of custom Swatch watches, 9 years of development, $1 million party, $263 million at the global box office. The patience of the build made the arrival possible. 4. The Cannes premiere cost $1 million for the party alone.
A 6-month overhaul, you understand?
The world premiere of The Fifth Element took place at the Cannes Film Festival on May 7, 1997. It was the opening film of the festival's 50th anniversary edition, a deliberate choice that announced the film's ambitions before a single review had been written. The film brought Luc Besson, Mila Jovovich, Bruce Willis, Gary Oldman, Chris Tucker, and a cast of supporting stars up the Palais steps. An extraordinary concentration of global celebrity for a French science fiction film. The world's press was present, the film screened, and then the party began. The celebration following the premiere reportedly cost $1 million, a record for any Cannes festival event. It was held in a specially constructed space of more than 100,000 square feet near the seafront. Jean-Paul Gaultier staged a fashion show. A futuristic ballet was performed. Dinner was served to 1,000 guests. Fireworks marked the evening. The tickets to the event were distributed in the form of specially made Swatch watches. Hollywood had been staging expensive premieres for decades, but a European film dropping $1 million on its Cannes opening party was genuinely unprecedented. It was a statement as much as a celebration. The declaration that The Fifth Element was not a modest art house project seeking festival prestige, but a global commercial event arriving on its own terms, in its home territory, with full confidence. The film would go on to win the technical grand prize at Cannes that year. The party was merely the opening argument. 3. The critics couldn't agree on anything, and still can't.
Really? Yeah!
When The Fifth Element arrived in theaters in the summer of 1997, the critical response was one of the most genuinely divided reactions any film had received in years. Not divided in the sense of mixed reviews, divided in the sense of completely irreconcilable assessments of what had just been seen. Some critics called it a triumph, a visionary, kinetic, beautifully realized science fiction epic that brought the visual language of European comics to the big screen with stunning confidence. The costumes, the world building, the specific audacity of a film that mixed opera and slapstick and gunfights and romance without blinking. A joyful, maximalist masterpiece. Others found it insufferable. The tonal whiplash between serious mythology and broad comedy was, for these critics, not a feature, but a failure. Gary Oldman's cartoonish villain was, depending on who you asked, either brilliantly calibrated or wildly overplayed. Chris Tucker's Ruby Road was described as either a comic revelation or an endurance test. The plot, most agreed, was essentially decorative, present enough to justify the action but never the actual point. The film has been officially described, without irony, as both the best and worst summer blockbuster of 1997. It received a BAFTA for Best Special Visual Effects. It was also nominated for a Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Supporting Actor for Chris Tucker, whose performance was simultaneously one of the most discussed elements of the film. 27 years later, the conversation hasn't settled. New generations discover the film, form passionate opinions in both directions, and the debate continues. A film that nobody agrees on doesn't become irrelevant. It becomes permanent. 2. The film was Luc Besson's only attempt to make what he'd always dreamed of.
Кажется, мой треснут. Нормальный
And here is the fact about The Fifth Element that matters most within its director's career. After the film's success, Besson moved in a different creative direction. He produced, rather than directed, for much of the following decade. He made sequels and action films and crime thrillers. He built EuropaCorp into one of Europe's most commercially productive studios. He finally returned to the Valerian and Laureline universe that had always influenced him, making Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets in 2017, a film that cost a reported $200 million, borrowed even more directly from the comic books he'd loved as a child, and lost enormous money. It was a critical and commercial disappointment. Critics noted that it had all the visual ambition of The Fifth Element and none of its strange, irreducible life. The difference between the two films is the difference between executing a vision from the outside and building it from the inside. The Fifth Element began as a 16-year-old's private mythology, an emotional architecture built over decades before it became a film. Every element of it, however chaotic or undisciplined it looks on screen, comes from a place of genuine conviction. Besson wasn't making a comic book adaptation. He was making his comic book, the one he'd been writing since childhood, finally given the resources to exist. Valerian was the adaptation of someone else's work, however much it had influenced him. The Fifth Element was his, and that distinction is visible in every frame. 1. What the Fifth Element was actually saying. And here is the thing that sits underneath all the costumes and the flying taxis and the impossible opera. The Fifth Element is a film about whether love is sufficient, whether it is enough, whether, in the face of darkness that wants to consume everything, that feeds on human destruction and grows stronger the more humans demonstrate their capacity for it, the experience of loving someone can constitute a defense. This is the literal plot of the film. Lilu, the Fifth Element, is the weapon. But she can only become the weapon if she chooses to. And she is having difficulty choosing because she has been studying the history of humanity, its wars, its genocides, its systematic capacity for self-destruction. And she cannot see the argument for saving it. What is worth saving? Corbin Dallas, a taxi driver, an ordinary man of no particular cosmic significance. A man who, by the logic of the film's universe, should be entirely irrelevant to the question of whether the world survives. He is the answer, not his heroism, not his action. The fact that he loves her, the fact that he looks at this being, frightened, exhausted, overwhelmed by the evidence of human darkness, and chooses her, completely, without calculation. The Fifth Element is love. The film announces this and then spends 2 hours actually demonstrating it, not as sentiment, but as mechanism, as the actual force that determines whether the world continues. An argument dressed up in orange hair and flying taxis and the most extravagant science fiction ever made in Europe. Besson started writing it when he was 16, a teenager who wanted to believe that love was the most powerful thing that existed. 22 years later, he made a film that argued it was the only thing that could save us. Critics called it the worst summer blockbuster of 1997. Maybe, but it's also the most sincere one. 15 facts, one film. And I want to know, where do you actually stand? Is The Fifth Element a masterpiece? Or is it beautiful chaos that barely works? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe for more of this. We'll be back next week.